Hi fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. I'm fantasy writer Neil Mach, the author of Moondog and the Reed Leopard, and I want to share my love of folklore, local history and nature mythology with writers and creatives like you on my regular podcasts. It's designed with fellow indie publishers and writers in mind, but all fans of fantasy fiction are very welcome to join in. In my fantasy writer's kit bag, writers, artists and creatives will find lots of ideas and discussion about things such as potions, dark arts, fabulous creatures, folktale studies, nature lore, and the interesting history behind the myth and magic that underpins our understanding of the fictional universe. Hello fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy fiction writer's kit bag. Next week, in just a few days' time, I'm off to Toulouse in France to stay at the castle that Toulouse-Lautrec inhabited. I'm up in Toulouse for my youngest daughter's wedding, so that should be rather exciting, and I'm looking forward to telling you all about it. So that means that this weekend I'm doing a shorter version of the podcast, which will be broadcast on Wednesday. And the title is The Most Magical Castles in Britain. Number 1. Ritual Sacrifice at the Death of Serpents. Reculver Tower. Reculver is a village near the ancient city of Canterbury, past the Wantsum Straits on the northeastern tip of the county of Kent, on a mysterious island known as the Isle of Thanet. In the late 50s and early 60s, my sisters and I would visit the Isle of Thanet for our summer vacations. The place name Thanet comes from the word Thanatos, meaning the death of serpents. Here was a major Stone Age settlement, as well as Iron Age and Bronze Age encampments. When the Romans invaded the British Isles on 2 occasions, this is where they landed. The Romans built stronghold forts at Richborough in the south and Reculver in the north to protect passing vessels. You can still see the remains of the Reculver fort underneath the 12th century towers of the ruined St Mary's Church that was founded in 669. A by name for the Reculver towers is the Twin Sisters. 10 infant burials have been found within the fort. All of these were babies. It's thought the babies were probably buried in the buildings as a ritual sacrifice to protect and preserve the stonework. A local folk tale suggests that the building is haunted by a crying baby. In the year 597, August of Canterbury landed with 40 men at Ebbsfleet in the parish of the Minster in Thanet, and here he founded Britain's second Christian monastery, later to be known as Canterbury. The first was founded 50 years earlier by St Columba in the Hebrides. And so after that, Thanet became a regular target for Viking attacks. In the Middle Ages, Reculver was one of several members of the Cinque Port of Sandwich. The first status was recorded in about 1300. Like other limbs of the Cinque Port, for example Fordwich, Deal, Serre and Stonar, it was then involved in maritime trade and shared in the Cinque Port's duty to supply ships and men for a king's use in return for concessions such as tax exemption. Robert Hunt, the vicar of Reculver, from 1595 to 1602, became Minister of Religion to the English colonial settlement of Jamestown, Virginia. So there's a link between the Reculver Towers and Virginia. Number 2. Candlestone Castle and the Lost Village. Candlestone Castle is a 14th century fortified manor house, southwest of the Merthyr Mawr, former Glamorgan, in Wales. Candleston was part of an important medieval settlement, but the doomed castle began to die when the village and all of its accompanying farmland disappeared under flowing dunes that followed a series of violent storms. Myths and legends built up around the disappearance of the village, with many stories of villagers appearing in ghostly form, coming to seek out their lost homes and their kin. The castle is now a romantic ruin and an important habitat for protected species such as butterflies, moths, autumn gentian, violets and wild orchids. Number 3. The Witch Queen of Leeds Castle. Leeds Castle is nowhere near Leeds. Actually, it's in Kent, which is in the south of England. It stands on islands in a lake formed by the River Len. A castle has existed on this site since the Saxon chieftain Led built a wooden structure in about 857. In 1119, the Normans rebuilt the stronghold in stone, and in 1519, Henry VIII transformed the castle again for his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, one of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Thomas Fairfax, the 6th Lord Fairfax of Cameron, was born in the castle in 1693, and he settled in North America to oversee the Culpeper Estates. You might be aware of the Culpeper Estates. So the castle is surrounded by a mirror-like moat and lined with picture postcard battlements. And certainly, I visited it a number of times, and it's one of the most fairy tale castles in Britain. But it holds within its pretty walls a mysterious and dark magical secret, because this was where the Witch Queen of England was imprisoned. Joan of Navarre was Queen of England by marriage to King Henry IV. Joan and Henry had no children of their own, but she had a very good relationship with the children from Henry's first marriage, and in fact she often took sides with the future Henry V. Henry IV died and was succeeded by Henry V, who entrusted Joan of Navarre as regent in his absence. But in 1419, Joan of Navarre became the only Queen of England ever to be jailed for witchcraft and necromancy. Her large fortune was confiscated and she was imprisoned in Pevensey Castle in Sussex, and then later in Leeds Castle in Kent. She was released upon the order of Henry V in 1422, 6 weeks before he died. Was the witchcraft effective? And she spent most of the remainder of her life in Nottingham Castle. And finally, the monster of Glamis. Glamis Castle, another picturesque castle, is situated by the village of Glamis in Angus, Scotland. Glamis was the childhood home of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, our present Queen's mother, who was born in 1900. And Prince Margaret, the Countess of Snowdon, was also born in Glamis. Glamis Castle has prehistoric origins, and William Shakespeare's fictional character, Macbeth, the Thane of Glamis, lived in it. In the play, Macbeth later commits regicide to fulfil a witch's prophecy that he will one day be king. Originally a royal hunting lodge, the 14th century castle was elaborated upon in the 15th century. The most famous legend connected with the castle is that of the monster of Glamis. The monster was a hideously deformed child born to the family. A singer named Virginia Gabriel stayed at the castle in 1870 and allegedly witnessed this spectral image. The story goes that the monster was kept in the castle all of his life, and his suite of rooms were bricked up after his death. And therefore he still roams the castle, still wanting his freedom. He's been described by those who've seen him as half frog, half man. Now, interestingly enough, records do show that a child was born here on the 21st of October, 1821. His name was Thomas Léon Bose, and he died the same day, according to the register. Yet a local midwife's account suggests that the deformed child was born but otherwise in good health, and when she left the castle to go back home to the village, the child was still alive. So she was surprised when reports came in that he died the same day, because as far as she was concerned, he didn't. There's no gravestone for Thomas Léon Bowes in the castle or the village, and this tends to support those initial rumours. And just to add more evidence, during a visit to Glamis, the Queen Mother's biographer, Mr. Michael Thornton, was allegedly told by the 16th Earl, who was living in the castle 1949 to 1967, that the entrance to the chamber where Thomas lived had been bricked up after his death. It's said that to every generation of the Glamis family, a vampire child is born. Once they recognise that the child is a vampire, he's walled up in the same room. On an entirely different note, but also quite interesting, another claim to fame for the castle is that in 1034, King Malcolm II, the King of the Scots, was mortally wounded in a battle nearby. He was taken to the castle to die. It's said that his ghost also roams the castle. Myth and Magic News. The Cerne Abbas Giant Scour. This week, the villagers at the English village of Cerne Abbas completed their colossal 2-month-long giant scour. The giant scour is the cleaning of the 180-foot-high Cerne Abbas Giant. His regular cleaning is known as a scouring and is completed by local villagers who come out in force to help. They bring picks and shovels and strong brushes, and they clean out almost 20 tons of chalk to make the huge white giant visible for miles. Like the Long Man of Wilmington, I'm sure to return to the Cerne Abbas Giant in future shows. But I wanted to quickly describe him. He's known as the Rude Man, and if you look at the picture on my show notes, you'll see why. And he's rather mysterious. Although the figure seems to be Saxon or even earlier, there's no mention of it in any scripts until the late 17th century, making its origin quite difficult to prove. And a 1996 study found that some features had changed over time. For example, when they examined the chalk outlines, they realised that the figure originally held a cloak in his left arm, and also he stood over a disembodied head. One theory is that the giant is a recreation of Romano-British culture, because the giant resembles the Roman god Hercules. Another is that he's of Celtic origin, perhaps because he's stylistically similar to a Celtic god found on a skillet handle at Hod Hill in Dorset nearby. It's also possible, of course, that the Cerne Abbas Giant is a hoax, a giant hoax in this case, perpetrated in the 17th century. Folklore includes tales about the giant's use as a fertility symbol, and when you look at it in my show notes, you'll see why. It's said that the locals would erect a maypole on the earthwork around which childless couples would dance to promote fertility. And according to a local belief, a woman who sleeps on the figure overnight will be blessed with child. Another suggestion, and I like this one, is that the outline is actually a real crime scene outline of the actual corpse of an actual giant. It's said that the giant came from Denmark and he led an invasion party, but he was beheaded by local people while he slept. And afterwards, I suppose, the CSIs outlined the body. The Cerne Abbas Giant Scour. Magic Word of the Week. Indigo Children. Indigo children possess special, unusual and sometimes supernatural traits and abilities. Even if they don't possess skills such as telepathy, they are still often seen as more empathetic and creative than their elders and peers. The term indigo children was first coined by parapsychologist and psychic Nancy Ann Tapp in the 1970s. She stated that she began to notice many children were being born with indigo auras. And indigo children are described as empathic, curious and strong-willed, perceived as being strange, having a clear sense of purpose, having a subconscious sense of spirituality, and having a strong feeling of entitlement. So indigo children are sensitive, psychic and strong-willed. Does that remind you of anyone? Do any of your characters share the same traits? Could you describe any of your characters as an indigo child? Of course, this is nothing new. The magical belief that the innocence of a child equates to some kind of spiritual power has existed for many centuries. But it seems that this New Age thinking goes some way in addressing our wider moral panics. For example, the diagnosis of conditions such as ADHD and autism, and the concerns about children being poisoned, both literally by a noxious atmosphere, for example, or by technology. Fantasy writer's definition: synchronicity. Now, I experienced a little piece of synchronicity at Oakley Court last weekend at the Rocky Horror Picnic, which I discussed in my last show. Now, at this Rocky Horror Picnic, I chose to dress up as the Joker, and I'd been planning my outfit for a few months. And I wanted to go as the Joker from the Dark Knight series of Batman movies, in fact the Heath Ledger version of the character. But quite by chance, the makeup artist who worked on the Joker's face, who worked on Heath Ledger's face, turned up unannounced at the picnic. Peter Rob King was surprised to find that I'd gone for the Joker look, especially at a Rocky Horror Picnic type show. He was there to celebrate his wife's birthday, and he came over to look at our outrageous costumes. So how could I possibly have known that Peter Rob King would turn up? And by the way, he worked on Tim Curry's Frank on the Rocky Horror Picture Show too, and that's probably how he knew about Oakley Court and why he was there. Anyway, these extraordinary set of relative coincidences got me thinking about synchronicity. If an event seems to produce meaningful coincidences but have no apparent causal relationships, the term is synchronicity. Carl Jung, who was a believer in the paranormal, as well as a world-famous psychologist, used the term synchronicity for the existence of paranormal events. Of course, the counter-argument is that synchronicities are merely coincidences or spurious correlations which can be described by the laws of statistics. I remember a friend of mine once told me that they saw a person from their own street in England whilst on holiday in Spain. Of all the places in all the world, don't you think it's amazing that I saw my neighbour on the very same beach, they said. Isn't that spooky? They asked. Afterwards I thought about it and I realised it wasn't spooky at all. For example, they both had the same kind of income. Well, they both lived on the same street, so I guess they did. They were both the same social class. They were both of the same education, approximately the same age. They probably both had the same desires. They probably both saw the same adverts on telly. And they met on a beach in Spain. It wasn't on a mountain peak in Patagonia or in a monastery in Tibet or walking across the Antarctica. It's a common enough place to go on holiday if you're an English person from the working classes. And most people in the world, let's be honest, they come from China and India, and those type of people don't tend to holiday in Spain. Most likely it's only Europeans who holiday in Spain, and quite probably the English are the biggest proportion, and they tend to gravitate near the bars and cafes. And I wondered, was it near a beach bar that he had his spooky coincidence? So all those things that I just mentioned, the same social class, same education, beach bars, they're all things known as causal connections. But Jung wrote that synchronicity was not the result of cause and effect, but rather what he eloquently described as a falling together in time. Nevertheless, mathematicians hold that Littlewood's law applies. Littlewood's law says that an ordinary person would experience a coincidental event, and that's an event which has the odds of 1 in a million, about once a month. So, more often than you might think. And there's also a theory known as confirmation bias, and this is defined as the tendency to search for or interpret new information in a way that confirms one's own preconceptions. So in other words, we interpret information or we exclude facts, sometimes, just so that it fits in with or it doesn't contradict our own belief. As a fiction writer, it's probably best not to use synchronicity in your world building. If you do, you might be accused of having a feeble imaginative faculty. In fiction, chance encounters or improbable twists of fate are the signs of unconvincing plotting. And yet, synchronicity happens in real life. Have you got any examples of real life synchronicity? Have you got any examples of fictional synchronicity you'd like to share? Synchronicity. Fabulous creature of the week, the cockatrice. A cockatrice is a two-legged dragon or serpent-like creature with a rooster's head. The creature featured in Pliny's Natural History, which was written about 77 to 79 AD, but most think that he might have been confusing what he saw, or what he was reported to have seen, with a Nile crocodile. The cockatrice has the reputed ability to kill a person just by looking at them, with a death-darting eye. The first use of the word in English was in the Bible by John Wycliffe. His 1382 translation used the word cockatrice, although the word was later replaced by basilisk, and later still by the comparatively innocuous viper. In Shakespeare's play, Richard III, the Duchess of York compares her son Richard to a cockatrice. And the Korean cockatrice, also known as Gailaon, chicken dragon, is often seen pulling chariots across the sky containing important, legendary figures. The cockatrice. Wildflower of the week, deadly nightshade. When I was a boy, we had nightshade growing under a yew tree in our garden. Both were very dangerous. My mother allowed it to grow. She was a keen gardener, and I often wondered why. Atropa belladonna, commonly known as belladonna, or just deadly nightshade, is a perennial herbaceous plant in the nightshade family. The nightshade family includes tomatoes and potatoes and chili peppers that I covered in episode 2 of Myth and Magic, so they're not all bad, but belladonna is bad. The common name belladonna comes from its historic use by women. It's Italian for beautiful lady, and ladies used to use belladonna eye drops to dilate their pupils, thus making them look more alluring. The foliage and the tempting sweet black berries are extremely toxic when eaten. Symptoms of belladonna poisoning, and there are many, include such things as confusion, hallucinations, delirium, and convulsions. And despite its toxicity, belladonna has been used in herbal medicine for centuries as a pain reliever and a muscle relaxer and an anti-inflammatory. Additionally, belladonna and the related plants, commonly known as Jimson weed, have occasionally been used as recreational drugs, and that's because of the vivid hallucinations and the deliriums that they produce. In ancient Rome, belladonna was used as a poison by Agrippina the Younger, who was the wife of Emperor Claudius, and on the advice of Locusta, a woman who specialised in poisons. Macbeth of Scotland, the true Macbeth, when he was still one of the lieutenants of King Duncan I of Scotland, used it during a truce to poison the troops of the invading Harold Harefoot, King of England. Belladonna appears in the ancient folk traditions of Romania, Moldavia, and the Ukrainian region of the Carpathians. And there's a ritual in these areas which says that when a woman uses the plant, it will enhance her attractiveness. So a girl might enter the fields on a Sunday at Shrovetide, clad in her Sunday best and accompanied by her mother, and she'll bring with her a bag of bread, salt and brandy. In the field she digs up the deadly nightshade, takes the roots and leaves 3 offerings, the bread, salt and brandy, in its place. As she returns home, she carries the root on the top of her head. deadly nightshade.